Yes, a very good morning to you. It's Tuesday, the 4th of August 2020. My name's Pete Fairbairn and welcome back to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff, where we find 5 of the biggest stories making waves in the world of sport, deliver them to you in a short, sharp fashion before 8 o'clock every weekday morning. And as always, I'm joined by one of Australia's top sports journalists, or in this instance, I'm feeling incredibly lucky to be joined by the sports editor of the Australian newspaper. How are you, Wally Mason?
Very good to be with you. Good morning.
Fantastic to have you on the show, Wally. And as a young man who grew up reading the Australian sports pages in rural Queensland, quite a privilege indeed. 5 big stories we're going to speak to today, and we're going to start in your newspaper with a story from Wayne Smith in the Australian, looking at the fact that the bubble rugby championship between the All Blacks and Wallabies, the Pumas and the Springboks, is unlikely to proceed in New Zealand later this year. That was, of course, the plan for all 4 teams to be based in that one country. With coronavirus spikes in both South Africa and Argentina, it's looking less and less likely. What we think we're more likely to see, according to Wayne Smith, is 4 tests between the All Blacks and the Wallabies, a couple here in Australia, a couple in New Zealand. There'll be some pretty strict quarantine rules on both sides of the Tasman. Think, I guess, of the way that the New Zealand Warriors had to quarantine here in Australia, but were still able to train and prepare within that Tamworth isolation bubble. Think of a similar environment the All Blacks and Wallabies as they travel trans-Tasman. But Wally, I want to ask you, will 4 tests against the All Blacks be good for the Wallabies' development under new head coach Dave Rennie, or is it simply going to serve to highlight the gap between those two sides at this point in time?
It's jumping in at the deep end, isn't it? It's he comes as a new Wallabies coach. He'll have a very different team to the team that played in last year's World Cup. A lot of players have left. A lot of players are retired. New kids coming through, and their only experience will have been playing in this Rugby AU, Super Rugby AU, which a lot of people think might not be the best preparation. And then we go up against the best rugby team in the world. You would have to think that it might not end well for the Wallabies.
The flip side of that, I guess, Rennie gets the opportunity to bring some fresh blood into the team who don't bear the scars of former Bledisloe battles, and also haven't even necessarily been coming up against the likes of the Crusaders, Hurricanes, Blues, these strong New Zealand teams in recent weeks. We had Christy Doran on the show yesterday. He suggested the Brumbies and Reds likely to fill most spots in a match day 23. So you do have players coming in, regardless of to what that form line looks like. They've been winning matches and therefore could have a fair degree of confidence.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think Christie's right that the Reds and the Brumbies will fill most of those spots. And it is actually, interestingly, the New Zealanders I know are a little bit concerned that their players they're smashing each other up. Because all these great New Zealand sides are coming up against each other every week. It's unrelenting for them. And they've had injury problems and it's wearing them down. It may very well be that the Wallabies who haven't had the disadvantage of getting belted by New Zealand teams every couple of weeks will be a bit fresher. Rennie gets 2 weeks with them while they're in isolation. There'll be 2-week periods of isolation right through this series. There'll be a period of preparation before the tests in Australia. And then Australia will go to New Zealand and have a 2-week isolation period where Rennie will be able to work with them. And then he even gets a go at them for a couple of weeks at the end when there's no rugby later in the year.
Just what rugby players and athletes like, more time to do intensive reviews. We moved from rugby union to rugby league, and a bit of a revelation last night on NRL 360 on Fox Sports with the New Zealand Warriors interim coach Todd Payten revealing in that interview that he's actually turned down the opportunity to coach the Warriors full-time as their head coach in 2021 onwards. He is contracted as an assistant coach in New Zealand next year. He revealed that his wife's father is undergoing chemotherapy and he'd prefer to return to Australia. He is, of course, a highly rated contender for the North Queensland Cowboys role. Having worked there previously as an assistant, his focus on defence is really exactly what that Cowboys team is looking for. But a pretty startling revelation that you don't often see news broken in this fashion, Wally.
You don't, and you don't often see blokes getting offered coaching jobs in the NRL and knocking it back. They're hard to come by. But I think you can understand. I mean, Payten said that he knocked back the job with reluctantly, but I think you can see that he had, he's got, as he said, his wife's father is very ill, and she doesn't want to be, in another country while our father's undergoing chemotherapy. And he's got very close ties with the Cowboys as well, and he's made no secret of the fact that that's the job that he's after. But of course, that doesn't mean he'll get it. There are a few high-profile contenders still for that job. There have been strong links over the last couple of days. Michael Maguire from the Tigers, he's denied that, or apparently he's told the club that he's not going anywhere. But he's among several contenders. Jason Riles from the assistant at the Storm Prince is another one, who are in for that Cowboys job.
And, usually when there's smoke, there's fire. Maguire, of course, has also been linked with that Warriors job because he is the New Zealand head coach as it currently stands. He has relationships with a lot of those Warriors players already. And, that club, clearly what they've been lacking for a while is potentially that bit of a hard taskmaster. It'll be interesting to see what direction the Warriors coaching job goes in next. We know they've ruled out Jeff Tuvey. We know that the Walker brothers have been told they won't be successful. Speculation that Nathan Brown, who had previously withdrawn his interest for that position, is likely to come back into the fray across the Tasman. He's close mates with Warriors head of recruitment, Peter O'Sullivan. He spent some time working with the Warriors halves in pre-season this year. I don't know personally whether Nathan Brown's the man to turn that Warriors team into a consistent one, but there's certainly plenty to play out there. We move from the NRL to the AFL, and an article from Courtney Walsh in the Australian today. And he actually brought some stats and figures to light, which I certainly wasn't familiar with. And it's ahead of a cracking matchup tonight in the AFL between the informed Brisbane Lions and, of course, defending champions or defending premiers Richmond. Did we actually know, I certainly didn't, Wally, that Jack Riewoldt is the only player in this Richmond team who has played in a losing match against Brisbane. Brisbane last defeated Richmond in 2009. Jonathan Brown was playing, Simon Black was playing, even Ben Cousins was running around for Richmond. It's a 14-game losing streak for the Lions against the Tigers, the longest in the AFL, longest losing streak of any current rivals. Do Brisbane need to defeat Richmond tonight to actually show that they're the real deal in 2020?
I think it'd go a long way towards it. If you remember, when they played in, the same two teams played in round 23 last year, at a time when, Richmond was dominant, but the Lions were making a run. Richmond won that game. It was looked upon as one of the best games of the 2019 season. A real clash between two of the more exciting teams of the modern era. And Richmond went on from there. That was the point that they then coasted almost to the flag after that win. I think this year the boot might be on the other foot. I think the coming team in the AFL at the moment, aside from Port Adelaide, is the Brisbane Lions, and I think you'll see them do very well against Richmond tonight. I think that losing streak might be about to come to an end.
They'll never get a better opportunity. They'll play the majority of their matches at home in Queensland this year. Charlie Cameron, Brisbane superstar, points out in Courtney Walsh's article that Brisbane players are staying in their homes right now. They know that Richmond are staying in hotels, so Brisbane very fortunate from that perspective. In Lachie Neale, they've got the form player in the competition. But as you say, it's a great opportunity for them to, I guess, erase some of the memories of 2019. There are a lot of questions about Brisbane heading into this season with that straight sets finals defeat last year. They've rebounded really, really well so far. Can they do it when the pressure is well and truly on? Tonight will be a fairly good indicator. To our penultimate story today, and it comes from racing.com, and it's analysis around Racing Victoria's approval that they've been given by the state government in Victoria to continue. All three codes of racing are able to continue under the state's new stricter protocols, which have been introduced to combat the spread of the coronavirus. Racing Victoria CEO Giles Thompson praised the efforts of jockeys, trainers and stable staff in recent months for allowing that industry to keep going. It employs over 100,000 people in that state, and it's had very strict protocols and systems in place, which has enabled racing to continue in Victoria. It's pretty remarkable when you look at the state of the lockdown down there that they have managed to keep such a fluid industry going. I want to ask you, Wally, how impressive is it that they've managed to adhere to strict protocols and continue to shift the goalposts to keep their sport up and running despite the current challenges in Victoria from a COVID perspective?
I think it's one of the great untold success, well, not untold, of course, we're talking about it here, but certainly one of the great success stories of sport in the pandemic is the way that racing across Australia has actually managed to keep going. In Victoria, obviously with particular problems down there, but certainly in New South Wales as well, racing has kept going, sticking to very, very strictly to the biosecurity protocols. They've managed to do it pretty well uninterrupted. No crowds, of course, or at least very limited crowds, and limits on owners. Owners aren't allowed at all down in Melbourne. But still, racing has continued at a time when, even right through the time when all of the footy codes and other sports were locked down, racing kept going. Very impressive.
We've seen massive TV rating spikes, particularly in that time when there wasn't any competition from other sports. We know that it will impact the ability for some of the overseas raiders to come across for the Spring Carnival. We know that Japanese horses, for example, looking unlikely to come across for the Cox Plate. And there have been challenges around shifting some horses, between states for different meets. But in general, we're looking at over 190 race meetings safely conducted during that period without a single case of COVID-19. I think Racing Victoria should be rightly very, very proud of that. I know that is a situation that they'll continue to have to manage really tightly, and they certainly won't be resting on their laurels. But I think you sum it up perfectly when you say it is one of the great success stories of the pandemic. Our final story today comes from business writer John Stensholt in The Australian. He's got a fascinating interview here with media rights value director Colin Smith. We know, of course, Colin Smith, one of Australia's preeminent sports TV rights experts, essentially looking at the most popular participation sports in Australia, the likes of cricket and football, and their failure to convert their big on-field participation numbers into television viewers and lucrative rights deals. Clearly the cricket rights deal is significantly larger than the majority of other sports, but we know the A-League has struggled to generate a lot of interest and to attract eyeballs. We know that they've signed a heavily reduced one-year deal with Fox Sports, which is seen by many as a last throw of the dice for that competition and that league to actually generate a groundswell of support, despite the fact that it is the most popular participation sport in the country. And I think to John Stensholt's article, it's a really stark illustration of why administrators need to focus on ensuring that not only that they have big participation numbers, but they're able to evoke genuine emotion and tribalism within the professional leg of those sports. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah. I think there must be millions of blokes across Australia playing in over 35 football competitions, and then on a Saturday afternoon, and then coming home and watching rugby league at night. There's a massive problem, I think, for a couple of these sports. Netball's another one. There are more women playing netball than nearly any other sport going, but their figures have struggled to, break out into the mainstream. But particularly soccer, as we say, their broadcast deal is in all sorts of trouble in the coming years. But I think the biggest sport affected by this is cricket. I think you'd be very worried to look at these figures if you were anything to do with running, particularly the Big Bash, where huge participation figures in cricket in summer in Australia, but the Big Bash figures have been, their TV ratings and crowd figures, although they were 2 or 3 years ago they were on the rise. They've been falling since 2015. And there are all sorts of problems with the Big Bash that have been identified, and I don't know that they've been challenged. And Colin Smith has pointed out a couple of the key ones about the absence of big international stars in the Big Bash, the fact that a lot of Australian Test players aren't able to spend more than a handful of games playing with their Big Bash teams. It goes on too long. I think Cricket Australia need to think seriously about the structure of the Big Bash if it's going to be a long-term ratings winner.
Yeah, very well said indeed. Wally, I'm going to grab your one to watch in the world of sport before I let you go. For those watching or listening for the first time, thanks very much for jumping on board. You can grab the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff via all your favourite podcast channels, also online via Twitter and YouTube. What are we watching out for in the world of sport today, Wally?
Mate, I keep an eye out for what young Joseph Suwali is doing. Turned 17 on Saturday. We think he's going to sign with Souths, but he's told them he wants more time to think about it. Does that mean he's decided that maybe it's better to go to rugby and play sevens in the Olympics next year?
I think certainly in that battle, the Olympic lure is the greatest asset the rugby union has to sell right now. Obviously, still great uncertainty about what that competition structure for Super Rugby looks like for 2021 onwards, but the Olympic Games are a pretty special selling point there if Joseph Suwali were to be convinced to come across to rugby. Wally, thank you so much for your time. Great to have you on the show and hope to have you back again in the future.
Good to talk to you.